It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Okay, my guest today is Clive Doyle. He's the author of the book, Journey to Waco, Autobiography of a Branch Davidian. Clive Doyle was one of these Branch Davidians. He lived there. This was his faith. And he was attacked by the ATF and the FBI. I believe, tragically, he lost his daughter, and he has burns still to this day on his body, and that he was charged with murder and almost faced prison. Clive Doyle, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
Can we start off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your life right now, today? How is Clive Doyle?
A lot older than I was when it all happened. I still live in Waco. I'm retired, and still getting to tell people about what happened periodically. So that's why I'm here.
Right. Now, can you tell us about your faith? What was it that got you into this Seventh-day Adventist Branch Davidian faith?
Well, it all started back when I was 10 years old. Some neighbor children lived next door to us, told us that they had seen a tent down at about a mile from the house, and they wanted to go check it out, but their parents wouldn't let them. So they asked my mother and I if we would escort them there, you might say, and chaperone them. And so we went. I thought it was going to be a circus or something, but it turned out it was an evangelistic deal put on by the Seventh-day Adventists. So as a result of that, my mother and I joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Over a period of time, we were studying with some other people and ended up becoming Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. And in 1964, we got some literature from America, because I was living in Australia at the time. We got literature from America and basically read ourselves into the Branch Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. And so I had come over here to the United States and was living at Mount Carmel, just outside of Waco, Texas, at the time that a man by the name of Vernon Howell showed up. And as a result of listening to what he had to say in 1983, I believed that he was a messenger of God. I accepted what he was presenting, and we ended up joining with him, and was there at the time that the ATF decided to raid the place.
Now, your faith today is the same? You're still following the same doctrine?
Yes, I am.
Okay. It's interesting you mentioned that you ran into this Seventh-day Adventist at a tent ministry, because I actually lived and worked in a Pentecostal tent ministry from around 1990 to 1994 in my own life. So if you maybe if it had run into us, things would have turned out a little different for you. But you're still you would describe yourself as the same exact faith as you've always had since this time in 64, I guess, right?
Right.
Okay. Now
I haven't given up.
Gotcha. Well, your faith is probably the most powerful thing in your life. If you make that the rock, the rock your foundation. Now, all these allegations that you hear about what was going on down there under Koresh. These things about multiple wives and children out of wedlock. Did you see any of these things?
Well, let me just say that if you've had any experience with a prophet of God, either living or in the scriptures, you'll find that God quite often asked prophets to do certain things that were, you might say, contrary to the norm, what public opinion would accept or what you would expect. As a Christian, for instance, you'd be horrified at what some of the prophets in the Bible did, for instance. And so in the case of David Koresh, he believed God was talking to him, and he believed that what God was asking him to do was to be basically a living witness to the hypocrisy that you find in Christianity today. You have people professing certain rules and regulations or standards, and actually behind the scenes they're doing something else. And so quite often God asks a prophet to demonstrate that. In ancient times, in biblical times, the prophet Isaiah, for instance, was asked to run around stark naked for 3.5 years. And, that was quite a challenge even for him to be able to come to grips with. And so he asked God, what am I going to say when people ask me what the heck I'm doing? And God says, you explain to them that if they don't listen to this message that I'm sending through you, this is the way they are going to look when they are carted off into captivity, which ultimately happened some years afterwards in the time of the Babylonians. They would, in the old days, most battles of conquest that went on, the victors would round up trophies of war, you might say, and take them back to their city, to their capital, and parade them down the street as see what we've done, sort of thing. See all the different ones that we've conquered. And so Isaiah was asked to demonstrate this, which was pretty embarrassing to him, I imagine. So totally against, you might say, the laws of the land. It was contrary to public opinion, what was considered polite or appropriate. And so, and he wasn't the only one. Throughout the Bible, you find people that were asked to go marry prostitutes to demonstrate that the relationship of God's people, the church, you might say, had become so estranged from God, who was to be considered their husband in a spiritual way, that these prophets were supposed to demonstrate that they were actually operating as a religion. They were actually hypocrites, or they were adulterers, or fornicators, or whatever in the eyes of God. And so prophets being asked to do that, if they took on the job, in most cases it got them killed, because the people didn't like being told what to do, and they certainly didn't like prophets pointing out their sins.
Well, let me ask you this. But in the Old Testament, with these prophets, there would be accompanying miracles or victories in battle and stuff like that to ultimately, vindicate them as they were valid prophets, correct?
Many of the prophets in the Old Testament had prophecies that directly, not always were they fulfilled in their lifetime, but in many cases they were. And so when that happened, of course, they were vindicated. But most of the prophets, in reality, aside from the historical setting and the immediate situation, most of those prophets were actually writing for the last days. Their prophecies were long-term, so right. The vindication wasn't always within their lifetime.
Okay, now, did you see these kinds of? What convinced you that David Koresh was a legitimate prophet? What did you see in him?
Well, it says in the Bible that there was nothing about Christ that the people, that would make the people desire him of himself. It was the Spirit that was within within Christ, and I believe within all of the prophets, that convinces a person. The Spirit in the prophet and the Spirit that's within the person that's listening has to harmonize. You have to be convinced or convicted in order to align yourself with that. If you're not convicted, if the Spirit doesn't move you to, put it on your heart, you might say, or on your mind that this is truth that's being presented, then you undoubtedly wouldn't join. And so there has to be a certain amount of inspiration, you might say, not only in the speaker but in the audience.
Okay, now in this church there down in Mount Carmel, what did you see, like the fruit of the Spirit and the gifts of the Spirit? Was there healing? Was there prophecy? Was there tongues? Describe to me, what would go on in a daily worship session and teaching and a Bible study?
What David said was that God, he wasn't going around healing, and he wasn't going around doing miracles of any kind or speaking in tongues, as you asked. His miracle, you might say, was the fact that he could teach the Bible, and in my case, better than I'd ever heard before. So, we had people that joined with David that were ministers from various churches. We had people there that had college educations. One of the people that was with him had taught comparative religions in Hawaii. And so, it wasn't a bunch of, you might say, country bumpkins or uneducated people that latched on to David. There was all kinds from all spectrums, from many different countries in the world, many different education levels. And so I believe what I saw taking place over the 9 years that I was with him, that it was definitely a manifestation of miracle-working power, but in a message rather than in actions and doing miracles or something like that.
Yeah, teaching is definitely one of the gifts. That's good. Now let me ask you, but these things back before, when I asked you about these allegations of multiple wives and children out of wedlock. And weren't there some child abuse charges too as well? Did you see any of these things, or you think that it was okay to do that?
The government always makes charges of child abuse. That's right. One of their winning tickets to justify their actions in the eyes of the public. But there was no child abuse that I was aware of. There were women who, as a result of the Bible studies that were being given, chose to, you might say, have relations with David, produce children by David, but they believed that was God's will. And so, I would go along with that as long as I'm convicted that God was talking to him, and they were convicted that what was being asked was for a very good reason, you might say.
Now, these women, were they married when he took them, or were they single women?
Started out with single women. Okay. Toward the end, he did have some relations with some women that had been married.
Okay. So then those allegations you see, about the women, where I guess we can say were okay, when were real. What was it that brought the attention of the ATF to this church, to the extent that they would insert undercover agents and establish a satellite residence across the way there. What was it?
Well, it started out by some, disgruntled members that had left some years before, stirring up stories. They tried to get various law enforcement agencies to shut us down, you might say, but most of the people that they went to, that they brought their allegations or their stories to, paid very little attention to them. It wasn't until they started talking about the fact that we had guns that the ATF pricked up their ears and decided that they were interested. And but most of the reports that went to the ATF prior to the raid were not recent. In other words, the information might have been eight months old or a couple of years old, and based on that fact, they really didn't. Without investigating further, they shouldn't have gone and got a warrant on those grounds. I mean, the information, you might say, was stale, but the ATF went ahead and made plans to put this raid together, partly as a what shall we say, a public spectacle. They wanted to justify themselves to the Treasury Department, who, from what I understand, was in the process of taking the BATF out of business and dividing all the agents up amongst other existing law enforcement agencies. So they wanted to make a show, you might say, to convince the Treasury that they were still a viable force, they were still needed, they were doing a good job or whatever. They even nicknamed the raid as Operation Showtime.
Oh, really?
And they invited the press, which was probably one of their biggest undoings. They invited the press to come and film it all, and they actually, were sorry they did that. Then when it all went sour, they tried to put all the blame on the press. Well, they leaked, the fact that they were coming out that day and tipped us off, so to speak, when in reality they were the ones that were tipping everybody off because they were so clumsy and an undercover agent, if you're going to have an undercover agent, he needs to be able to infiltrate without being detected. You don't take over a house across the road and sit over there shooting guns and coming over for a visit, pretending to be students at the technical college and all this sort of stuff. That didn't fool anybody. So, in reality, they themselves were the biggest tip-offs that something was going on.
Well, so when you met these undercover agents, when they came by, you suspected that they were some type of federal agents?
Oh, sure.
And what did you suspect?
Here's the thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Back in the November of '92, our neighbor from across the road, who happened to work for the Double E Ranch, came over. He and his family used to come over, and his kids would play with our kids and so forth. They'd come over to watch movies, or they'd come over to have a Bible study or whatever. So what was happening was, the guy from across the road came over and he said to David, he says, "Do you think I could get some help this coming week to fix up the empty house that was next door to him?" And so David sent some guys over there to help him out. We kind of thought, well, whatever it is he wants to do. You know, maybe if we all pitch in, it'll be like a barn raising or something. We'll get it done in a hurry. And it turned out it was more of a long, an ongoing project. So David kind of restricted it after a while. He said, well, we've got work here to do as well. We can't allow all the guys to go over and, do this all the time. So in the course of working on this house, some of our guys said to the neighbor, why are we fixing this house up? Is it going to be for rent? Is the owner of the ranch that you work for, is he going to fix it up and rent it out? And he came back a couple of days later and says, well, it's not for rent. He had a black woman that worked down at the main ranch house, and he said she's going to be living in it with her teenage son. So that was all right with us, no problem. But in January, like a month or so later, one of our guys who was jogging around the perimeter of the property come back huffing and puffing and says, I guess what I saw. And we says, well, what did you see? And he says, well, there's a bunch of guys moving into that house that we were working on. I said, oh, okay. I guess the lady's not going to move in. Got some guys moving in there instead. And so he says, but that's not the weirdest thing. He says they've got no furniture. They got no suitcases with clothes or anything. All they've got are these long cases that look like rifle cases. So that was a kind of a bit of a tip-off. Eventually, cut a long story short, they made contact by coming over on one pretext or another and visiting, and their story was that they were students at the technical college. Well, these guys were in their 40s and so forth. They were not kids, they were not young people even. They were middle-aged, and they all had brand-new cars.
Oh, boy.
And so we checked them out. We checked them out with the college. Do you have students by these names or with these license tags on their cars? And they said, no, we don't. And so, all kinds of red flags were cropping up over a 4 or 5 month period that indicated that we were being, we were in the process of being watched. Now, David didn't ever say to us, this is the ATF. What he thought they might have been, to begin with anyway, was from the immigration, people, because we had students from all over the world, and we figured, well, maybe they're a little concerned with all these different nationalities being there, that we were had illegal immigrants or whatever. So I remember David counseling the people one night in the meetings. He says, I would recommend that instead of just going for a walk by yourself at night or even during the day, that you go with somebody else. You have somebody else there, either a group or at least a couple of other people. That way, if it is immigration and they're picking you up for questioning, we'll know what happened. Otherwise, if you just disappear, we won't know what the heck's going on. And so, turns out, of course, it wasn't immigration. It was the ATF, and they never at any time found anything that they could report back to their superiors that we were doing anything illegal.
When they came over for their Bible study, did you ever ask them, hey, what's the story, guys? What are you cops?
I don't know that David confronted them, but a couple of them came over one night with this flimsy story that hey, David, we went to a gun show or we went to a pawn shop or something, and look what we got. We got this rifle, And David asked him, well, do you mind if I have a look at it? And so they handed it over to him. And he said he stripped it down right in front of them in like 30 seconds sort of thing, looked at it, put it all back together and handed it to him. And he says, this is not something you found at a pawn shop or even at a gun show necessarily. He says, because this is a sniper rifle. He says, and there's only so many of these in the country. So, you wouldn't be finding these just being bandied about or sold here and there at gun shows. And he said that their faces about fell on the floor when he put that to them.
Yeah, that would be a pretty bad mistake, because you guys were going to gun shows.
The thing they did was a mistake.
Yeah.
They used, when they finally got a search warrant, I don't know how they convinced the judge or whether he was just lax or what, but some of the wording in the search warrant had nothing to do with the ATF. It was not in their jurisdiction. The ATF, that's not their job to worry whether children are being spanked or whether, people are living in sin or what, particularly. But, they used that language to get the warrant. There was something about it, in my opinion, that raised a red flag with the judge, because what he ended up doing was he made the search warrant for one day, and only during the day, not at night. So on the day of the raid, before the raid took place, they sent one of the guys they thought was an undercover agent. They sent him in to do a last-minute check as to what we were doing, whether anybody had guns or whatever. And it was during his visit that the television guy encountered one of our guys going to buy a newspaper, encountered him down the road, and when he was asked, did he need help or whatever, he's asked him.
Did I lose you? I hope Danny's there. Hey, Danny, I think we lost the connection. Talking to Clive Doyle, author of the book Journey to Waco, Autobiography of a Branch Davidian. You can find a link over there at the Opperman Report bookstore. Clive Doyle was one of the, lived there in the Branch Davidian home compound there. They like to call it a compound. Hello? Well, I'm trying to call Clive here. It's see if I can get him back.
Hello.
Oh, Clive, we got you back?
Yeah, I think we got cut off somehow. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. Okay, you were talking about how that morning one of your friends, housemates there, ran into a TV reporter down the road, and there was some kind of information exchanged.
One of our guys was a mail carrier, and the local newspaper had started to run a series on us, a derogatory series on us in the paper. It was supposed to last a week. And so what they did, they came out with the first issue on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday morning, which was the day of the raid, a couple of our guys went out to buy newspapers so that we could get the second edition, see what was in it. And so one of our guys went out our front gate and went to the left. He never came back. We learned later that he was arrested and held in custody at the motel where all the ATF were stationed, or where they were staying. And so the other one went to the right, and when he got about a mile or so down the road, he saw a car parked on the side of the road, and so he stopped to offer assistance. He thought maybe they were broken down, and it turned out that it was this guy from the TV station, and he said he was looking for Mount Carmel. And so he asked him, well, you're practically there, it's just up the top of the hill there. You can't miss it. He says, well, why are you looking for Mount Carmel? And that was when the guy told him that he'd received a report, like many various media people had been told to show up and, like I said, film the thing. So he was there for that reason, but he said, they'd got word that there was supposed to be like a big raid or something on this place, and that he was there to cover it. So this young man, this mail carrier, continued his way down the road, but he went to a phone and called back in and said something's going on. You can expect company sort of thing. And so at the same time, one of the ATF guys from across the road was in there talking to David in our foyer, just inside the front door. And so when that happened, David kind of confronted him and says, well, sounds like they're coming. Whether he knew who they were, I don't know, but and that scared this ATF agent. He made an excuse that he had to leave in a hurry and go eat breakfast, and so he went barreling out of our driveway like a maniac and honking his horn and everything, and he got over to the house across the road, and he's asking where the leaders of the raid were. They said, they're all down at the staging area downtown, about 10 miles away. And so he came flying out of the house across the road and went down, flying down the road. And so, from what I understand, when he got downtown, they were in the process of loading up in the trailers on the back of the trucks, and he's yelling at them, call it off, they know you're coming. Well, they'd invested so much effort, I guess, into putting this thing together. They had agents from 5 different states, and like I said, their warrant was only good for a certain number of hours, and so they didn't want to call it off. They wanted to go ahead with it, and so they ignored him and come rushing out there.
Let me slow you down for 1 second. What were they expecting to find in there? Like 1,000 guns, automatic machine guns, hand grenades? What were they expecting?
They had come to the conclusion, without any real proof, but they'd come to the conclusion that weapons were being altered from just regular semi-automatic or whatever to fully automatic, which is basically illegal unless you've got a special permit. And so that's what they expected to find. The warrant was for the arrest of David Koresh and for searching the building. And they supposedly had no qualms with anybody else in there. And yet, rather than like I say, call it off and reschedule it for another time, they decided to go ahead. Now, during our trial in San Antonio, some of the ATF agents that were put on the witness stand were asked, well, what did you do when you first heard the guns going off? And they said, well, 3 of them, I think it was, ran behind one of our vehicles that was pulled up across the driveway at the north end of the building. And they says, well, what did you think when you... where did you hear the shots coming from? They said, from down near the front door. And they says, well, what did you think was happening? And they said, we figured they were shooting... Our guys were shooting their dogs. That was their statement. And... which they were. They shot 5 of our dogs that were right there inside a fence. One of them chained to the flagpole just near the front door. But the dogs were not in any way attacking them or able to get to them because of the fence. But what they wanted to do was to get into the dog area so that they could put flashbang grenades through the windows, to disorient us or whatever you want to call it, distract us. And so they shot the dogs. But that initial shooting, they were not only shooting the dog, they were shooting into the building as well. They shot David and his father-in-law right inside the front door. And so, on the strength of that, or as a result of that, some of the members that were in there that either had guns or were able to get guns returned fire.
Let me ask a couple of questions. How many guns were in the compound there in the house?
I don't know exactly. Okay. I'm sure that the government could tell you how many they think or allegedly found, but I don't know for sure.
Okay, and
most of the guns that David had. He had been dealing with a particular gun dealer south of town, and this guy had put the proposition to him that if he would invest in these, what they call assault weapons, AR-15 or, these Russian Kalashnikov type of guns, that the government was about to have them banned from being manufactured or imported or whatever. And so they said the way the law was going to read was that if you had them, you could continue to sell them.
Right.
But there wouldn't be any more after they ran out, so to speak. So he said, this is a good way to make it. The prices on them would go up after the cutoff date, and you could make some money reselling them. And that was the initial deal that, they were coming. They were in crates. They were all disassembled. They had to be put together in order to sell them as a rifle. And so that's what David, from what I understand, was doing, was assembling them. And
what was he selling them, or he was gonna hang on to them, or was he selling them at the time as well as buying them?
Say that again.
After he would assemble them, was he selling them at the time, or was he holding on to them?
He had guys that were going to gun shows especially around Texas, and so that we sold some guns leading up to the raid. Mostly, what we were selling was stuff we'd bought from an Army disposal outfit that went out of business. We bought up their supplies. They had like military clothing, camouflage clothing, different things like that, MREs, all that kind of stuff that they sell in a Army disposal place. And so that had been an ongoing business for a while, selling those kind of things.
Now, besides that, though, were you as a group also like stockpiling weapons for self-defense and food storage and that kind of thing as well?
Did we have food storage?
Yeah, you know how like people
we had
like
a lot of food. We had a lot of people. So,
but you know how people are survivalists.
There was a certain amount of stockpiling when it came to food and things like that, because we had, like I say, we had quite a few people to feed. There was basically about 130 of us there at the time of the raid.
And also, too, now, am I correct that you had buried a bus underneath the dirt?
David buried a bus at the north end of the building that went from the end of the building out towards another building that we were building, which was basically a storm shelter. We were planning on putting a second story on it. The first story was under the ground, and so the bus gave us an opportunity to go from the building to the storm shelter without coming above ground. But then we were going to build on top of that in order to fix cars and things like that.
Now, when this attack first started, okay, because it is outrageous for them to, they have an arrest warrant for one individual, and they show up with a whole army. They're shooting tear gas and they're shooting dogs. It's outrageous, no matter how you look at it. Now, when this starts all, excuse my language, but hell starts breaking loose, where were you in the house and what did you do?
At the time they drove in the driveway, I was in my room on the front side of the building on the first floor, up toward the north end. David had told everybody when he heard that somebody was coming, he said, I want everybody to go back to their rooms, just stay calm. He said, I'll go down to the door and see what they want. And so myself, I went back to my room, and I could hear him walk down to the door, down the hallway, and about the time he got to the door and opened it, I heard him yell out, hey, wait a minute, there's women and children here. And then, as you say, all hell broke loose. Just a huge barrage of gunfire coming into the building. And in my opinion, just from listening to it without being able to see it from inside my room, I figured that there would have been a bloodbath down at the front door. So my instinctive reaction was to run down there to see if I could render aid to anybody that might have been wounded. And so I made a beeline down the hall, and I got about halfway down, and David's father-in-law was crawling on his hands and knees up the hallway, screaming that he'd been shot. And so I stopped and tried to calm him down and see how he was, how badly he'd been wounded and everything. And then I said to him, is anybody else shot? And he says, yes, David was shot. He said David was standing right in front of him. David opened the door, and they shot him through the arm that was resting on the door. And so he slammed the door and ran upstairs, and he ended up catching another bullet upstairs in the stomach. So,
So did you guys go run for guns too?
What's that?
Did you go run and look for your gun?
No, I was trying to render aid to those that were wounded.
Right.
But not everybody had guns. They tried to make out that we'd been tipped off maybe half an hour before they got there, and we had immediately gone into ambush mode and just were mowing them down as they started driving in the driveway, which is a total lie.
Yeah, they actually did a made-for-TV movie like that has a whole scene where you guys are there, everybody in that building is standing with machine guns, But obviously, but that's been all
the shooting. Yeah, the shooting went on for about 2.5 hours.
Oh my God!
Before we managed, we're the ones that initiated. Let's get a ceasefire going. We called the sheriff's department or 911,
right?
And the sheriff's department couldn't even get in touch with the ATF for about 40 minutes. So the shooting's going on all of that time pretty heavily. Then, it took another hour and a half or so to get it stopped completely because they claimed they couldn't reach all of their guys because only 1 in every 3 had a radio. They were divided into groups of 3, and only the leader had a radio. So getting the word out and getting it implemented and all of that kind of stuff took some time. But after that, we realized after that we were in for, anytime there's an officer down,
right.
Law enforcement wants to beat the heck out of you sort of thing, come back and get revenge. And so...
Let me ask you this, though. There's a lot of documentaries out there and they're pretty well done, some of them, that these officers were killed by friendly fire. They were killed by their own other officers, or even helicopter fire, and some of it looks very convincing. What do you think of all those theories?
Well, some of them are way out there. A lot of people make accusations against the government that I don't uphold at all. But during our trial, we did get one of the guys. If you've seen any of the footage from that particular day, they put 2 ladders up on the side of the chapel,
right,
onto the roof, and there were 2 teams went up these ladders. One went the nearest window on the south side of the building, and another group went over the hump of the building, over the hump of the roof to the other side, and were trying to break into a window over there. There were 3 guys that went into that first window, and we got the leader of that contingent to, during trial, he said that in all likelihood he may have shot his own guy inside the room.
Yeah.
And I said, well, how did that come about? Or what was going on with that? And he said, well, I was trying to ricochet. I was spraying bullets in all directions, but I was trying to ricochet it off the walls. And we're going, you don't ricochet bullets off a sheetrock. That don't make any sense at all. But that was his story to begin with. And so he said the 3 that went in kind of situated themselves in a triangle, and he was on the bottom part of that triangle spraying in all directions, so at least one guy was almost directly in front of him. So he kind of, from what I remember, he half-heartedly admitted that he may have wounded his own guy. There's all kinds of stories about the guy that was sliding down the ladder shot himself in the foot or something. I don't think that's necessarily a true statement from what I was able to glean from the trial. But one thing that they never let on about is the fact that there was snipers and stuff across the road shooting, and all their men are on the driveway parallel to the road. So they're having to shoot past them to hit anybody in the building, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, somebody suddenly stands up.
Whether any of those was friendly fire, it's hard to say. A lot of it looks suspicious. I've seen footage that, like there's one guy behind a van out the front, near the front door, and his gun jams or something, and he's jerking it back and forth, trying to clear it. And the next thing, there's a guy that's shot, killed. So whether he shot him or not, I don't know, and I'm not about to swear up and down who did what to who, in that case. But there were so many situations like that they wanted to, the idea was if they were there to arrest David, Well, then David's on the first floor. That's where all the men were. They knew where the men were in the building. The men were on the first floor. All the women and children were on the second floor. So when you watch those footages of the shooting, these agents are shooting into the second floor. By and large, there was shooting at the first floor, especially around the front door, but a lot of it's going into the rooms where the women with their small children were. And to me, that's it. That's criminal in my mind, at least careless, you know.
What about helicopter fire into the building? Did you witness any of that?
Not personally. The helicopters were actually circling long before the trucks got out there. They were circling around for about a half hour before the trucks came. They claimed during the trial that nobody fired. There was no firing from the helicopters. But under cross-examination, after basically lying through their teeth for quite a while, they finally got themselves in a jam.
Okay, we're with Clive Doyle. He's the author of the book Journey to Waco, Autobiography of a Branch Davidian. Mr. Doyle was there on that day when the ATF attacked his home with a search warrant looking for David Koresh, and they decided to just shoot up the whole place and start a 51-day-long siege. When we left off, Mr. Doyle, we were saying, I was asking about the bullet holes in the ceiling from helicopters, and I thought I saw some telephone conversations where they were complaining about the bullet holes in the ceiling.
That's correct. The ATF denied that there was any shooting from the helicopters, but there's numerous eyewitnesses, both from within and from without, that say that, that the bullet holes that came in, that are in the roof and the ceiling, were incoming rather than outgoing. So we got the pilot of one of the helicopters to admit on during the trial that, first of all, he said there was no shooting from the helicopters, but when they cross-examined him and pinned him down, he finally admitted that, well, what I meant was that there were no mounted guns on the helicopters, but there were agents that were armed, and so it's pretty obvious that somebody up there was shooting. One of the girls that was in on the third floor said she heard a noise outside the window, and she went to look and scared the daylights out of her because this helicopter's right outside the window. And she said as she's looking, it shocked her so much she kind of jerked back, and just as she did, the glass shattered in the window. Definitely coming from the helicopter. It couldn't have come from anywhere else at that end of the building. Okay,
so now you're there, and I guess then we're at the stage of where the siege takes place, where you guys are in there pretty much not held hostage, but it's like a standoff.
We were held hostage in as much as we were told we couldn't just come out on our own. We had to negotiate. Anybody that came out had to negotiate over the phones, set it all up, and have it agreed on, and all of that kind of stuff. You couldn't just walk out the door. They weren't in favor of that. There were, what the public doesn't know, that over a period of time there was almost 36 people that were negotiated out. That's adults and children, and most people don't hear too much about that. But there came a point where they were not keeping up their part of the agreement on people coming out and so forth, and so it got to the point where people were reneging on coming out until there was a better better deal, you might say. And what happened toward the end of the siege was David, through the negotiators, said that God had told him to write out the seven seals, or his explanation of the seven seals, and that if they would allow him to do that, he would we would all come out en masse, all of us together. And it was all arranged with the lawyers and everything else. And so...
Wait, let me ask you, before we get to that, though, these people that were coming out, when they would come out, would they be arrested?
Sure. All of the adults went to jail, and all of the children were basically put in a foster care type of situation.
So the ones that came out during that period of time, how many of them went to jail, and are any of them still in jail?
There's nobody in jail right now.
Everybody's out, okay. Well, thank God for that, at least.
Initially, when we had the trial, the judge ended up sentencing most of the adult men to 40 years in jail. That's another whole story in itself as to what went on there. But we had to end up going. We went to the appellate court in Louisiana, and we also had to go to the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. twice before the sentence was finally reduced to 15 years. So all of the guys that end up with the 40-year sentences, they're all out now because of, the 15 years is up.
Let me ask you this. The 36 that did leave, how did you come to pick those people to leave and not others?
The first ones that were sent out were children.
Okay.
And initially, there was a woman that walked two children up to the front gate and handed them over to them. And then they complained that was too dangerous, that we might shoot them when they came to receive the children at the gate. So they demanded that the children be taken a half a mile down the road and handed over to them. Well, the lady that was doing that was using a vehicle. So each time she'd take them out, she took them out in the vehicle and handed them over and came back. And so there came a point in the siege where the tanks that they had brought in, the FBI brought in all these tanks, they were using them to bulldoze everything. They were called CEVs, and they had big bulldozer blades on the front. And so they were bulldozing outlying buildings down. They were bulldozing anything that they figured would be in their way when they did the final assault, I guess. And so in the course of building this big bonfire with all our building supplies and all of the wood from the outlying buildings, they also began pushing all our cars up onto this bonfire, which was just a few feet away from the building on the south end. And they put the car up that we were bringing the kids out with. So there were situations like that didn't sit too good with the parents or with anybody else in there, for that matter, that, here we were complying with what they were asking us to do, and they were doing things seemed like they were doing things just to try to make us mad or something. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Well, if you just think of how outrageous it is, just imagine that they come to arrest a family member and then they start destroying everybody's cars and out in front of the house.
Oh, yeah.
It's unheard of. Under any other circumstances, an arrest warrant for one person, and then you're going to be shooting up the whole house and destroying cars and property and climbing on the roof. This is unheard of.
Right.
Now, what were the conditions like? If you're in there for 51 days, what are you doing for food, for water? How are you going to the bathroom? What are you guys doing?
Well, on the first day of the raid, they shut up all our water supplies. We had tanks on the back of the building, big plastic tanks that provided water to the kitchen. And they shut them full of holes. And so we had no water except what rainwater we could collect in buckets or whatever. at the risk of being picked off by a sniper, we had to put buckets out where we couldn't be seen from the various sniper positions. And so water throughout the whole siege was pretty much limited to about 8 ounces or less per person per day. They turned off the electricity, which made our big walk-in cooler of no effect. So all of our frozen stuff and our fresh fruits and vegetables and things all perished. We either had to eat them up in a hurry in the first couple of days or throw them away. And so we got down to where we were basically just surviving on MREs, the ones that we were selling, had been selling at the flea markets and so forth.
In the beginning, were you ever able to cook?
The women could cook to some degree, whatever they had to cook. But, like I say, what was fresh deteriorated real quick, and of course the frozen stuff deteriorated very fast. So for most of the 51 days, we were living on MREs.
Now, what about, like, how many kids were still in the building during these 51 days?
Well, they were all there to begin with. A big percentage of the people that came out, like I said, there were about 36 were negotiated out. A lot of them were children, but David's immediate children and a couple of other families were still there on the last day and ended up dying in the fire.
Now, were these kids, were they able to occupy their time and be distracted from the constant you hear about these things about the music and the lights and the telephone receiver sound being broadcast? Were they ever able to be distracted away from that and just be normal kids?
Well, I don't know whether how you call it normal if you bombarded with noise and bright lights at night, to where you can't sleep and all of that sort of stuff. The only way anybody was getting any sleep at night was if they used earplugs. Myself, I didn't use earplugs, so I'd be lucky if I got 1 or 2 hours of sleep a day.
Oh, my God. And how do you negotiate if you're under those kind of conditions? You can't even think straight.
Well, they figured they would run us downhill, health-wise, to where, there would be no resistance, there would be no even logical negotiation or decision-making or whatever. So, what they were doing out there basically was experimenting with all of these various newfangled technology, sleep deprivation. They had robots that came with listening devices. They had a lot of mind control stuff that they were experimenting with. So I don't know whether they learned anything from all of that, really.
Yeah. Well, no, and wasn't there something too where
they figured that if they did enough noise deprivation, that we'd all come out because we couldn't stand it anymore, like that guy down in Panama did.
Right, Noriega.
Yeah. And so, but that didn't work. There wasn't anybody running out screaming, "I can't take it anymore, take me away," or whatever.
Now, if they only wanted, if the theory, because one of the questions we got from the chat room is they're asking if they only wanted Koresh, why didn't everybody else just leave? But by that point, as people were leaving, they were being arrested and charged with, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, right, okay. All right.
No, they asked one of the women that was in there who had 5 kids. They asked her, why don't you be a good mother and send your children out like the other mothers have done? And she says, well, we've thought about it. I put it to the children, and they chose to stay with me. They want to stay with. They don't want to be split up. They want to stay with me. And they says, well, why don't you come out with them? And they said, that way you can all be together. And she says, that's not true. She says, you're going to arrest me and put me in jail, and they're going to go to a foster home or some facility, And so, they'll tell you anything in the negotiating process. They'll tell you anything they think you want to hear that will make their life or their plans work to their advantage. They'll promise you anything. They don't necessarily deliver. David sent out $1,000 for them to send milk in to the children, the babies, because the women that were breastfeeding, because of all the trauma and everything, their breast milk dried up. And so it took several days before any milk came in. And then when it did, we began to find out that they're inserting all of these listening devices in the coolers and things like that. They sent a bag in with suture, needles and thread and stuff for David's wounds, and it was bugged. And so, those kind of things don't engender goodwill or trust between whoever you're dealing with and law enforcement when they pull that kind of stuff.
Now, what about, didn't some people show up? I think like Bo Greitz showed up and David Koresh's mother showed up, I believe, to try and negotiate, and they weren't allowed to. Were there any other intermediaries who showed up and tried to help negotiations?
There were a lot of people that offered to come in and negotiate with us, or medical people offered to come in and check out the wounded and the dead or whatever, and every one of them were blocked. Nobody got in. There were only 4 people that came in during that time, that 51 days. 2 of them were the lawyers, which they grudgingly let in, and 2 of them were people that ran the gauntlet, ran across the fields and ran up to the front door and banged and begged to be let in, which we did. We let them in, and But other than that, all the people that were offering to either negotiate or help out in a medical way or whatever, they were all blocked, including the fire brigade on the last day.
Who were these folks that ran up and knocked on the door? Did you know them?
No, we didn't know. There were 2 different guys. One, I think, was from Houston. I forget where the other one was from, but one guy, the second guy that came in, got there just as it was starting to get dark, and he's running across the field, and the helicopter's chasing him with loudspeakers saying, lay down or surrender or whatever. And he kept running, and he started taking all his clothes off to show that he didn't have a gun, that he was unarmed. So he's stripping down as he's running through the field, and he finally gets to the front door, and of course we let him in, and he was down to his underwear by that time.
And what did he say to you?
He just wanted to come in and tell us that he was supporting us, basically, and I think he thought he had a message for us of some kind, but the idea was that he stayed for a while. David told the people to be a witness to him, help him any way you can, and there came a point where he said, well, I want to leave, and of course he had no clothes of his own when he wanted to leave, so David gave him a complete suit of clothes, a pair of cowboy boots, fitted him up real nice for him to go out and be arrested, and I hear that wasn't the kind of clothes he wanted to wear forever, so he got rid of them as soon as he got out.
I never heard that part of the story. So now, but the couple of days when he was in there sitting around and you guys were witnessing to him, he must have had some kind of clothes. You must have gave him a T-shirt and shorts to put on, right?
Oh, well, initially they gave him some Army stuff because, they had all these clothes from our supply for selling at the gun shows. And so, in fact, quite a few of our people were wearing, this kind of clothing toward the end because all our clothes were dirty, and so we needed something.
What did you do for a latrine?
Well, we had an outhouse outside prior to the raid. Of course, once the raid took place and they ended up surrounding us with barbed wire and demolishing the outhouse anyway, we were down to going to the bathroom in buckets, which it was my job to empty.
And how'd you just throw it out the window?
No, I dug holes.
Okay.
And buried it.
So you were able to leave the building a little bit to dig a hole?
No, it was within the building.
Within the building.
There were parts of the building where you had a dirt floor.
Okay. Now, we were talking before...
Well, it wasn't in the main building, but you could get to it without leaving the building. It was out in the gymnasium or in the storm shelter. I dug holes in the storm shelter, the one that was connected to the underground bus, for a while, but then that building started filling up with water, so I couldn't dig out there anymore.
Oh, now that water that was filling up, were we able to use that water to bathe with or anything like that, or drink? Probably not. No.
It was filthy.
Okay.
Nasty.
Now, when this was going on, were you thinking like this is the apocalypse, this is the end? What were you thinking? Anything on that biblical kind of scale?
Well, I'm sure a lot of people felt, well, hey, this is just like we've been reading about, the beast making war on the saints and overcoming them and killing them and that kind of stuff that you read in the scriptures. Not that we were actually saying, well, this is the fulfillment of those scriptures. We weren't applying them that what we were going through was the final fulfillment of that, but they were comparing it to some of that, I'm sure.
Now, before we discuss people trying to come and help negotiate, at one point the FBI director wanted to come down and be the head negotiator. Did you have any information behind the scenes of what went on with that?
Well, from what I heard, that they prevented that up in Washington. They wouldn't let him.
Yeah, and why do you think all that was? Well, why was there so much chaos back in Washington over this?
I don't know what they thought would have happened if he had have come down, whether we'd have taken him hostage or would have jeopardized. A lot of things that could have been done didn't fit into their plans. For instance, prior to the raid, they had gone down to the gun dealer that we were buying weapons from, and were talking to him, checking out, all the sales he'd made to us and so forth, and he got on the phone and called David and says, hey, these guys are down here asking questions about you, and David says, well, tell them to come on out. We'll show them what we got and all of that. And they got mad when they found out that he'd called David, and so they says, hang up the phone. That's not part of our plan. Later on, I heard rumors of where one team of FBI people were inside some part of the building, maybe the gymnasium or whatever, and they said that they were within a few feet or whatever of David, and they could grab him right then and there, and they were told to back off and not grab him because that wasn't part of their plan. The plan, I think their plan was to wipe us out, because there's all kinds of stories coming out of some of these ATF, out of different cities where some of the team was from. They were sitting up there, like in Arkansas and so forth, boasting that they were going to Waco for a turkey shoot. So, it was not as they try to pretend just to serve a warrant or just to arrest David Koresh. They were going to put us out of business.
And why do you think that was?
Because I believe there's a devil.
Right.
And the devil hates God, but he can't get at God directly, so he gets at him through God's children.
Do you think there's any significance to the date April 18th, or I think it's April 19th? There's like an occult...
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of historical April 19th that are ominous. The destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto, I think, took place on April 19th.
Yeah, a lot of Nazi stuff, yeah. So do you think that there was an organized occult motivation behind this?
I don't know at top levels, who's involved with what. I can't prove anything along those lines, but I don't blame every agent that came out there as being, you might say, of the devil per se, but they get into these organizations and they get any decency and any religion knocked out of them in the process of training, just like our military does, and they're taught to don't question anything. You follow orders no matter what. Well, that's not exactly what members of law enforcement or members of the military are supposed to do. If you're ordered to do something that you know is illegal, you have the right to question it. You have the right to refuse. You may go to the brig for it, be put in jail, but you have the right to your conscience, even though you're law enforcement or military or whatever. And a lot of people think that that's maybe unloyal or disloyal, and they're scared to put it into effect. But that's the fact. You do not have to follow out if a superior officer orders you to do something that you know is wrong. You should speak up, or you should refuse to do it, even if it costs you your life. But most people aren't willing to give up their life for what they believe in. Now,
other than the date, did you notice in your studies and your beliefs any other occult or demonic influence in what they were doing that you saw this and says, whoa, what's going on here?
Well, from Scripture,
there's
certain things. I believe, and I've been taught most of my life, that in Revelation, there's a beast that gets commonly called the two-horned beast. And it tells you where he gets his power from. He gets it from the devil. So, if you want to talk about demonic influence, there's a connection right there. But to prove it on a one-to-one basis or on an every instance basis, it's not like David went out of his way to denigrate this country or law enforcement or the Justice Department or any of those various entities. But we do know that, there are people that lend themselves to the devil whether they're conscious of it or not.
Okay. Now, the day of the raid, when they come in with these tanks, was it a regular day? Were you expecting this? Did it seem like negotiations had broken down? Did they tell you in advance? Did they threaten you? Or was it just like a regular day and you thought, we have another week to go before things get really bad?
The day that they brought in the tanks?
Yeah.
It was not the first day of the raid. I think it was the second or third day that they brought the tanks in. I happened to be in the chapel, which is on the south side of the building, and all of a sudden the whole building started shaking like an earthquake. I've been in 3 earthquakes out in California, and I know kind of what they feel like. And so I'm thinking, boy, that feels like an earthquake. And I said, but, we don't have earthquakes here in Texas, not normally anyway. And so we thought, well, what's going on, So in the chapel, the windows were opaque. You couldn't see out of them. And so we went and raised the windows and looked out, and here's this big convoy of huge, big trucks with heavy-duty trailers on the back, and the tanks were loaded up on the truck. These things were half a mile away, and all the ground for a half a mile is shaking like an earthquake. So one of the girls that was close by, she went into the foyer where we had bookcases and stuff with books in, and she started looking up some encyclopedias on these tanks, on the specs that they had in the encyclopedia. And I can remember her saying, if these things start shooting, this building's going to look like Swiss cheese. So it was very ominous. In the meantime, Steve Schneider, who was kind of David's right-hand man, he gets on the phone and said, hey, what's with these tanks? What's going on? And they said, oh, don't worry, they're just here to keep a perimeter. They will not be coming on the property. We're just going to... And you go, well, why do you have to maintain a perimeter? Nobody's trying to escape or sneak off or anything, And, but of course, all of those promises of not coming on the property very soon were thrown out the window, and they were coming on the property. They were tearing the place up, like I said before, and, all bets are off. You can't promise one thing and do another without looking bad in the eyes of the people that are paying attention. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whether they're inside or out.
And how long did it take before they started trying to punch holes in the wall?
Well, they didn't punch any holes in the wall till the last day.
Okay.
51st day.
Okay, before we get to that then, you hear these stories about how Tim McVeigh came down and he was nearby, did you hear do you know anything about that?
Not firsthand, I don't.
Okay.
I mean,
you're not firsthand.
Nobody was aware of Timothy McVeigh. We'd never heard of him, never seen him or met him. His story, of course, was that he was so upset about what went on that he decided to do what he did in Oklahoma. But, it's not that we ask anybody to try to get even on our behalf. That's not a good thing. In fact, while we were in the siege, David made a point of stressing that he didn't want to hear the people in there talking negative against the ATF or the FBI. He says, these people, in spite of what they're doing, are souls to be saved. And we should be more concerned with their ultimately being saved, than gossiping about them or making remarks about them which are not constructive.
So on the day now, when they actually, the last day, when they start punching the holes in, were you expecting that to come?
Not really.
So it was just like a day like any other. Yeah.
I'd been sick all the day before. I'd actually gone to bed and stayed in bed, so I probably got some rest that day, the day before. And so that night I couldn't sleep because I'd been in bed all day. So I got up and I went down to the chapel, and I was listening to some of David's study tapes. And about the crack of dawn, around maybe 6 o'clock, somewhere around there, the loudspeakers fired up, and the guy saying, "This siege is over, come out now, or else we will start inserting gas." Now, we didn't know what inserting gas would involve until they actually started doing it, but the idea was that what they had got Janet Reno to sign off on was the gassing, by telling her that the children were still being brutalized, being beaten and everything throughout the siege, which is total lie, because most of the time in there during the siege, David was lying on the floor thinking he was, in all likelihood, dying, from these bullet wounds. But they, so nobody comes out. We prepare just in case they do start gassing us. We started, those of us that had access to them started putting gas masks on. Most of the women upstairs had no gas masks. They were coming down to the chapel and asking, was there any extras and things like that. The children didn't have any because they don't make them in a children's size. And so pretty much, once they start projecting the gas, you're in a whole lot of trouble, because that gas stings like crazy. It kind of burns your skin. It's very bad for your lungs. And so what the mothers were doing was they were trying to wrap the children in wet towels and wet blankets to protect them from the gas. And so the plan was they had enough gas for 48 hours, 2 days, and they were supposed to inject that into the building for 2 days, and if we hadn't come out by then, they were to go to what they call Plan B. Plan B was that the Bradley vehicles would be stationed at the four corners of the building, and they would fire these ferret rounds in. Ferret rounds being kind of like rockets, and when they come through the window or through an opening, and they strike something solid, like a wall or furniture or whatever, they break open and the gas hisses out of them. So by noon, within 6 hours, they'd used enough gas from the tanks that were spraying it, the ones that were poking holes in the building and spraying it in. They used that all up by 10 o'clock in 4 hours. And within 6 hours, they'd fired 300 rounds, or about 300 rounds of these ferret rounds. So, this is all illegal, what they were doing, because the ferret rounds contained a gas that was banned by the Geneva Convention. In the event that law enforcement does get to use it, the advice is, or the instructions on the casing is, not to be used indoors. It's for street riots if you use it at all, But they're using it indoors, an illegal gas that they couldn't even use on their enemies during wartime, and they're using it on their own people. We talk all about some of these dictators in these other countries gassing their own people. Well, America has done the same thing.
How come you see all these raids and stuff like that where they're able to shoot some tear gas into the house and it's enough to get people running out right away? I know those gas masks, they don't last very long. They're not very effective for a long time, right? Am I right?
I found out that. I didn't read the instructions. I just put it on as a cap over the muzzle, and I took the cap off and put it down somewhere and forgot what I did with it. So when you don't need it, you're supposed to take the gas mask off and recap it. But if it's being used continually, then it doesn't last more than 30 minutes. Right.
So then how come you guys weren't overcome by the gas in just a few hours?
Well, in my case, when my filter got blocked up, and I could hardly breathe through it. I took off the gas mask, but my skin stung like crazy from the gas getting on your bare skin. That I said, well, to heck with that. I'll put the gas mask on, even if I have to suck air through a blocked filter. And it wasn't very pleasant, but I saw grown men that got the gas on their skin and they were in tears just from the burning of it.
And what about the women and the children who didn't have gas masks? Were they suffering the entire time?
I wasn't where they were at.
Okay.
But I heard they'd gone into. David had told them to go into the vault where they. I guess he figured they'd be protected from the gas, but it turned out to be a death trap once the fire started.
Now, how did the fires start? Because you hear stories about that you guys were using lanterns, kerosene lanterns, or that they even claim that you were pouring flammable liquid on the ground and stuff. Tell us how the fires really started.
I don't know how they started. I can't answer that question as an eyewitness. I was in the chapel. At some point, word went out. We heard someone calling downstairs from upstairs saying that the building was on fire. Those of us that were in the chapel, the impression we got was that, it was somewhere in the front of the building and toward the south end. But we didn't see any evidence of it. But those of us that were in the chapel immediately moved behind a petition that was on the stage that you could get behind, like a little narrow walkway. And once we did that, we found that there was a hole that had been punched in the south wall behind this petition that led to outside. And so some of us congregated over toward that hole, but we're looking out, and there was across the driveway was the shed that they'd put a tank in, and outside of the tank was a guy in camos that was holding a gun. So we're kind of discussing, well, if we jump out, do you think he'll shoot us, and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a certain amount of hesitancy as to what would be the outcome if we jumped out. And in the meantime, people were coming into that area behind us from various other rooms in the building. And so, when you hear somebody coming in behind you, you spin around to check to whether they're your people or the FBI or whatever.
Right.
And so within just, I'd say, a couple of minutes, one guy and another guy and I were looking out the hole and trying to decide whether we'd be shot if we came out, when all of a sudden all of this smoke comes down the outside wall, the south wall, from the direction of the front toward the back of the building. But as it came down the outside wall and got to this hole that we were looking out of, it kind of got sucked in. So everything turned pitch black in there, and you couldn't see anything. And almost immediately I felt this tremendous heat over my head, like up in the ceiling, which literally just forced me down on the ground, just the weight of it kind of thing. And so I found myself rolling on the floor, trying to protect my hands from the tremendous heat, because I didn't have any gloves on, so my hands were being burned, and I was trying to stick them up under my armpits and one thing and another, and shortly after that, I began hearing guys screaming behind me, and I knew they were, or at least some of them I could tell from their voices. who they were, and it kind of galvanized me to jump up and try to find the hole in the wall. And when I got to it, I jumped out on the ground, and I remember looking at my hands. The skin was rolling off, not blistered, it was rolling off.
Yeah.
And my jacket was smoking and melting all over me. And I looked back over my shoulder, and there was just a mass of flames. And I thought to myself, my God, I'm the only one that got out. Nobody's coming out of there now, which turned out to be true. I was the last one to get out that hole. So I'm standing there, and I'm thinking, what do I do now? I can't stand with my back up against the hole because I'll burn to death anyway. So I moved away from the building and ran into the razor wire fence that they had all around us. I thought, oh, I forgot about that. Now what do I do? So I looked down toward the back of the property. I couldn't see any way to get through the fence. I couldn't see any body down that way that I recognized. So then I looked to my right, which was toward the front gate, and I see 4 guys walking up the driveway with their hands up in the air. I'm going, wow, they're our guys, and I'm not the only one that got out, and I'm thinking, great, I'll just follow them. And as I start to follow them, this guy that was over at the tank is screaming at me to come over to him. And of course, my ankle was burned, my side of my face was, the side of my neck was burned. So I'm hobbling over all of this plowed up ground that the tanks had, plowed it all up just like a farm field. And I get over to him, and he's screaming at me, where are the kids? Where are the kids?
Oh, God.
I said, I haven't seen the kids for 2 days. I didn't know that they'd gone into the vault. I hadn't, seen any of them since maybe the Friday before. And so when I told him I couldn't tell him, he was pretty agitated right from the start, because he's telling me if I make a wrong move, he'll blow my head off and all that sort of stuff. And so he finally says, you're going to remember this day for the rest of your life. And I says, that's probably true, But he says, told me to go on up the gate and to, follow the guys up to the gate. And when you get up there, there'll be somebody tells you what to do next, sort of thing. And so by the time I got up to the gate, the 4 guys were down on the ground, all handcuffed behind their back, face down on the ground. And they told me to put my head to their feet, start a new row, so, which I did. They handcuffed me, even though all the skin was coming off my hands and my wrists. And
let me ask you a question. When they saw that you had these severe burns, were they gentle about putting the handcuffs on, or they didn't care?
No. It wasn't until sometime after I'd been laying there handcuffed, and they're taking pictures, and they're asking me my name and all of that stuff. Finally, some guy walks up out of sight from me. He was behind me. My head was turned to one side, so I couldn't see him, but I heard his voice saying, this guy needs some attention. And eventually they carried me and put me in the back of a Bradley and took me to the medical tent, which was, I don't know, maybe 3/4 of a mile away. And that was a trip, because it's like being dragged down the road on a piece of tin. There's no shocks in it. Bradley vehicle.
And how much were they able to treat you there? Were they able to give you painkillers there in that tent?
They gave me 3 shots of morphine,
okay,
which I happened to say to somebody later on about that. And how do you know it was morphine? How do you know how many shots they gave you? I'm going, because I was paying attention, I guess, But they're all very belligerent, basically, and so when I got to the medical tent, I couldn't lay flat because the fire had dried my throat out so bad I couldn't swallow. I could breathe, but I couldn't swallow. And so I kept trying to raise my head up so I could, be more comfortable. And they kept pushing me down and getting angry at the fact that I was trying to sit up. And eventually, the doctors that were there made the decision that I needed to go to Parkland Hospital in Dallas and, to the burn ward.
Now, how long until you found out that all your friends and your loved ones and your family members had passed on?
Well, like I say, when I first came out of the hole, I thought to myself, I'm the only one that got out. That was the impression that was on my mind.
Right.
And when I saw the guys going up to the gate, I thought, well, my hopes rose again. Well, not everybody died. Maybe there's more got out in other places, And then when I got up and I was laying down on the ground being handcuffed and everything, I'm looking down and the big fireball goes off in about the center of the building. And I thought, oh my God, there's nobody getting out after that. But then they brought a girl up and put her on the ground beside me. And I thought, every time you might say something good happened, your hopes rise again, that there's still hope. Then when I finally got to Parkland Hospital in Dallas, I was told when I got there that there were two girls from Mount Carmel. Apparently they'd got there before me. And I said, well, please let me go and see them so I can know who they are, because I'm worried about my daughter and what have you. And I said, no, you're in too bad a shape, and we'll just describe them to you. So they said, well, there's one woman is fairly young, maybe in her 20s, late 20s, tall, black. And so it's the only tall black girl I could think of was Marjorie Thomas from England, and it turned out that's who it was. Marjorie had spent the whole of the 51 days in the chapel with me and my daughter. So then they said, and the other one's a 16-year-old blondish girl. And I'm thinking, I'll take that, you might say. Hopefully it's my daughter.
Yeah.
She wasn't 16, she was 18, but she was small for her age. So I figured maybe it was her, and I says, please let me go see her to identify her. I says, it might be my daughter. And, oh no, I'll tell you what, we'll bring you something and see if you can identify it. And I'm thinking they're going to bring, a piece of clothing, or they're going to bring maybe a necklace or whatever. Not that we wore jewelry or all that much, but I'm thinking they're going to bring something that you could identify her from. So they come back a little while later with a big mop of hair in their hand. I mean, about the size of a bun.
Oh, my God.
And it kind of annoyed me. I thought, what kind of a deal is this, You cut all the hair off just to show me? And anyway, when I looked at it, I said, well, I don't know who it'd be. I couldn't think at the time. I was probably medicated and shock and all the rest of it. So I says, unless the heat or the fire has changed the color of my daughter's hair, I don't think it's her. It turned out it was a young girl from North Carolina.
Oh, Clive, I'm so sorry. Clive, I'm so sorry for your loss.
So about that time, you pretty much know that that's it. You know what I'm saying?
I do know. I'm very sorry to hear this, sir.
They don't actually come and tell you where your daughter's dead or anything like that. They just, you do the math, well, there's so many survived and the rest of them haven't.
So just to wind this up, what do you want to leave us with to kind of wrap this up?
Well, I would just advise people not to buy into all that the media tells you or all that the government tells you without checking into it, finding out all they can about any situation. Because sure as you start digging, you're going to find out it's not all on the up and up, as far as the media or the official reports and all of that stuff. And I've noticed that ever since, that they'll tell you a story one day on the news and counteract it the next day. But aside from not believing everything you're told, hopefully people will be willing to, if they're interested in this subject at all, that they will not try to just get it off the internet, that they will try to come to the survivors that there are and ask questions, get the other side of the story, you might say, and find out why we were there. We were not there just because we were a bunch of yokels or retarded people or whatever. We were there because we believed in something. We were there for religious reasons, studying the scriptures, and it seems like that in many cases that's a crime in this country. So
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think that we're living in dark times.
I think God's people are going to come under a lot more attacks and a lot more, under persecution. And if your church is not being persecuted, then maybe your church is not doing God's will to the degree that it was commissioned back in the time of Christ.
That's very true as well. Yeah.
Christ taught that if you follow Him, they'll treat you like they did Him. So if there was a church out there that is in good with the government or in good with just about everybody loves them, maybe they're just not. And I don't mean they have to hit people over the head with the Bible or be a nuisance or seek persecution. But if you're trying to do the right thing, then definitely that kind of deal will follow you. The devil will make sure that you're not happy and able to accomplish your aims.
Mr. Doyle, we're totally out of time. I can't thank you enough for coming on here and sharing your story with us.
Okay, you're welcome. We didn't get all the details, but hopefully there's enough to where they can, the audience can choose to do more research. There are books out there. There's documentaries, some better than others, but hopefully they can learn the truth, the facts.
Oh, maybe we can do a little follow-up show. I'll call you during the week, and maybe we can set up like another hour or a half hour. We can tape it, okay, at your convenience, okay?
Okay.
Thank you so much. There you had Clive Doyle, okay, one of the Waco survivors. My God bless him. My heart goes out to him. As you guys know, I got my own 16-year-old kid, and you can just imagine. I didn't have the heart to ask him too much about the kid. I apologize for that. Maybe we can do that during a tape show. Thank you so much.